Really, if you could see what happens, there is no way to control your tears.
The Tibetans who are tortured are often those who are most committed to the preservation of the values of the Buddhist tradition. They are prepared to undergo all kinds of horrendous hardship in order that those values not be compromised or sacrificed. And that, I think, tells us a great deal about the power of Buddhist practice in their lives, that they have not broken under pressure, that they hold on to values that are more important and more potent for them than any kind of threats that the Chinese can throw at them. Because they say often that although the Chinese can torture my body, they cannot torture my soul.
One of the key ideas, of course, in Buddhism is the idea of karma. It gives the individual a sense of infinite interconnectedness with everything. And the individual person now is born a Tibetan. In a previous life, they were born a Chinese. In a previous life, they were born an American. In a previous life, they were born a dog. It is how they are able to, even after being beaten to death practically by some Chinese, actually not to hate a Chinese. Karma theory shows the individual as interconnected with all things.
After 15 years of imprisonment, Pauline Gyatso was sent to a labor camp, where he collaborated on pro-independence pamphlets and posters with the scholar Geshe Lobsang Wangchuk.
Because of these activities, I was once again arrested in 1983 and put in prison for another 9 years. Electric cattle prods were used on me many times. They used it often in my mouth.
Geshe Wangchuk wrote a book entitled The History of the Independence of Tibet. He was tortured to death. When Pauline Gyatso was finally released in 1992, he had been incarcerated for 33 years. At great risk, he arranged to smuggle torture implements from prison and escaped from Tibet, determined to tell the world of the suffering in his homeland.
I can say that this is what I personally experienced, these tortures, and I can even give you the date, times, and in fact, names of the torturers who inflicted these things on me.
Human right is something very, very important. Freedom is our basic right from our birth. I think it is our moral responsibility to help those people who are still under authoritarian regime.
In the spring of 1989, students massed by the tens of thousands in Beijing's Tiananmen Square to demand democratic freedoms.
I think Tiananmen was much more a threat to China than the leaders wanted to let on. And I think a decision was made to crush it at any cost.
They are very much afraid of the breaking up of China. It's like a domino effect. If there's a loss of control in Tibet, there will be similar loss of control in Xinjiang, in Inner Mongolia, and in other minority groups. The Chinese government saw the breakup of Soviet Union as a negative lesson, as something they will do everything to prevent from happening in China.
Amnesty International estimates that over 1,000 protesters and bystanders were killed by the guns of their own army.
I saw for the first time that the Chinese people, like us, were capable of being hurt. They're capable to cry. You see, they felt the same, pain and suffering that, we've been feeling for so long. And they had the same desire just as we did. They're talking about freedom. They're talking about democracy.
International outrage over Tiananmen Square was soon lost in the rush of businesses scrambling to gain access to China's vast emerging market. Pressure on Beijing to improve its human rights record was replaced by a policy of constructive engagement with China.
We welcome and support China's accession to the World Trade Organization. And in the long run, the advance of Chinese prosperity depends on China's full integration into the rules and norms of international institutions.
We have seen a natural entrepreneurial instinct of Chinese people come to bear in developing what can be a very strong economic democracy. It is impossible to develop an economic democracy without social democracy coming short behind.
Now, the business community would lead you to believe that trade in and of itself and economic development bring democracy. What builds democracy is human freedom, civil society, free and independent trade unions, and not money.
By the year 2000, the U.S. was China's largest trading partner, buying nearly half of China's worldwide exports, which has resulted in a trade deficit of $87 billion in China's favor. Many Chinese consumer products filling American shelves are produced by factories owned and operated by the People's Liberation Army.
The PLA not only suppresses its own people, but it suppresses the people of Tibet, and we are directly subsidizing that repression. We have raised capital for the People's Liberation Army on Wall Street. Mao must be just sort of laughing in his grave.
But people ask me, what does it mean for Tibet? That's not the question. What does it mean to your country, to your values, to your principles, the land of the free and home of the brave? Stooping down to this murderous dictatorship which has lost the confidence of its own people.
The Chinese run a very, very large and sophisticated propaganda operation. The Tibetans have gotten more sophisticated, but they're small. It is easy for the Chinese to portray people who are sympathetic with Tibet as religious fanatics, as New Agers, as people who are on the fringes of popular opinion, whereas China is a big, important international country, and they appeal to the political and economic mainstream.
I think big business is cornering the market in many ways on U.S.-China policy. People who have been fighting for human rights and democracy in China and Tibet are now up against a much bigger force than they ever were before. In the years to come, the China lobby in this country will be so significantly tied into the Chinese government with billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of contracts that those few voices calling for democracy and human rights in that part of the world will have a hell of a time in Congress making their case heard.
Today, the Chinese who are coming to Tibet are not armed with guns or communist ideology, but with a capitalist appetite to strike it rich on the rooftop of the world. It is this latest wave of invasion which the Chinese have used to successfully conquer other regions that threatens to wipe out Tibetan identity altogether. The Beijing government offers incentives to entice Chinese settlers to move to Tibet.
Nowadays, lots of Chinese have moved to Tibet. All the jobs have been given to those Chinese. No jobs are left for Tibetans. Building workers are Chinese, carpenters are Chinese, restaurant workers are Chinese. Tibetans cannot get a job at all.
In my judgment, this allegation is totally unfounded and far-fetched. The Chinese are mainly specialized personnel and technical workers. They are working in Tibet to help develop the local economy and culture.
Unemployed young Tibetans are a common sight, passing their days playing pool or listlessly watching Chinese programs in grungy TV parlors.
The problem is, unfortunately, that Tibet is not a part of China. It never